Pakistan has secured a $3 billion short-term financing deal with the IMF after months of negotiations, providing much-needed relief to the crisis-hit economy and averting a potential default. The agreement, known as a standby arrangement, is subject to finalization by the IMF's executive board, with approval expected by mid-July. Pakistan's economy is currently facing one of its most severe crises, with the risk of debt default looming. Foreign reserves have sharply declined to $3.5 billion, barely enough to cover 1 month's worth of imports, and inflation has soared to 38%. Despite having an existing bailout agreement with the IMF signed in 2019, the release of funds has been withheld since last year due to disagreements over economic policies. The previous agreement was set to expire, with a significant portion of the funding yet to be disbursed. The breakthrough came after Pakistan introduced tax increases, energy subsidy cuts, and the removal of certain currency and import restrictions in its upcoming financial year's budget. While the markets were closed at the time of the announcement, analysts expressed optimism about the deal, considering it better than anticipated. The $3 billion funding for a 9-month period is expected to restore investor confidence. The IMF had urged Pakistan to implement measures to broaden the tax base, liberalize the economy, and allocate resources for development spending. The government initially resisted such steps, citing concerns about their harsh impact and political challenges in a fragile economic environment. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif is expected to face strong competition in the upcoming national elections. Economists caution that the IMF agreement alone will not resolve Pakistan's deep-rooted economic problems. The country faces significant debt repayments of approximately $25 billion in the next financial year, which analysts believe will be challenging to meet without further financial support from lenders like China, Saudi Arabia, and additional IMF programs. Critics argue that Pakistan requires more extensive reforms beyond the proposed measures. The country has a history of being trapped in recurring boom and bust cycles, limiting sustainable growth. Some view the IMF programs as temporary solutions rather than long-term remedies, as tangible reforms have not been achieved in the past. The agreement with IMF is a significant step forward for Pakistan's economy, providing immediate relief and restoring investor confidence. However, challenges remain, and further reforms and financial support will be necessary to address the country's systemic economic problems and achieve sustainable growth in the long term. Recent actions by Islamabad to meet IMF conditions have raised hopes for unlocking $1.1 billion in assistance from an existing aid package set to expire soon. The IMF has commended these last-minute efforts. The proposed austerity measures include amendments to the country's new budget, aiming to raise taxes by $750 million to address the fiscal deficit, and the removal of all import restrictions to alleviate the current account deficit. In addition, Pakistan's central bank has raised interest rates to 22% in an effort to reduce demand and ease pressure on foreign reserves, which currently cover only a month's worth of imports. Securing new funds from the IMF would provide short-term relief for Pakistan's economic crisis, unlock additional financing from foreign creditors, boost prospects for foreign direct investment, and prevent a debt default. However, while the deal would provide breathing room, it does not offer a long-term solution to the country's economic woes. Without significant policy changes, the underlying problems will persist. Until recently, the prospects of reaching an agreement with the IMF seemed bleak for Pakistan. The government's efforts to boost popularity through increased energy subsidies clashed with the IMF's austerity conditions, and a coherent recovery plan was lacking. In recent weeks, senior IMF leaders publicly expressed concerns about Pakistan's economic policies and political instability. The IMF's rejection of Pakistan's budget further dampened hopes. Meanwhile, inflation in Pakistan reached a record high of 38%, driving some people, including over 100 migrants who tragically lost their lives in a shipwreck off Greece, to flee the country. Stricter border controls on land and air routes have pushed more individuals toward perilous sea routes to Europe. The economic strain is not limited to Pakistan's poor. Even wealthy and educated citizens are leaving, exacerbating the brain drain issue. In 2022, over 750,000 people left Pakistan, triple the number from the previous year. Among them were doctors, engineers, IT experts, and accountants. While the lifting of COVID-19 travel restrictions played a part, the desire for better opportunities abroad among skilled individuals is also a significant factor. An IMF deal would provide some relief for Pakistan's economic stress but not eliminate the underlying structural factors that led to the current crisis. These include heavy dependence on costly fuel imports, a textile sector struggling to compete globally, an inefficient agricultural sector grappling with water and energy shortages, and a corrupt political and economic elite unwilling to invest in public welfare. While an IMF deal could offer temporary respite and bolster the current government's standing before elections, it would be a hollow victory. Without the politically challenging large-scale reforms needed, Pakistan would remain vulnerable to future economic crises. Keen to boost its flagging popularity, the government had increased energy subsidies, which ran afoul of the IMF's austerity conditions. Islamabad also struggled to craft a coherent recovery plan. In recent weeks, senior IMF leaders have gone public with their concerns about Pakistan, both its economic policy choices and its unstable politics. The IMF's rejection of the country's budget earlier this month seemed to be the nail in the coffin. At the same time, inflation in Pakistan hit a record 38% in recent weeks. Crushing poverty is driving some people to flee the country, including the more than 100 Pakistani migrants who died in a shipwreck off Greece this month. According to Pakistani officials, stricter border control along land and air routes has prompted more people to try dangerous sea routes to Europe. Economic stress isn't only hitting Pakistan's poor. Wealthy and educated Pakistanis are leaving, too, exacerbating chronic brain drain. The country's Bureau of Immigration reports that more than 750,000 people left Pakistan in 2022, a threefold increase from 2021. They included doctors, engineers, IT experts, and accountants. The end of COVID-19 travel restrictions can in part explain the shift, but it is likely also due to a growing desire among skilled and well-educated workers to find better opportunities abroad. The economic stress driving this exodus would be eased but not eliminated by an IMF deal. That's because the underlying structural factors that triggered Pakistan's current crisis would still be in place. These include heavy reliance on costly fuel imports and on a top export, textiles, that struggles to compete globally, an inefficient agricultural sector grappling with water and energy shortages, and a political and economic elite prone to corruption and unwilling to invest more in public welfare. An IMF deal would give Pakistan some economic breathing room, and it could boost the current government and its supporters ahead of elections. But it would be a Pyrrhic victory. Barring badly needed large-scale reforms that are too politically risky, the next economic crisis could be just around the corner. Pakistan's prospects for reaching an agreement with the IMF appeared grim until recently. The government's attempts to boost popularity through increased energy subsidies clashed with the IMF's austerity conditions, and a coherent recovery plan was lacking. Concerns about Pakistan's economic policies and political instability were publicly expressed by senior IMF leaders, and the IMF's rejection of the country's budget further diminished hopes. Simultaneously, Pakistan experienced a record inflation rate of 38%, leading to an exodus of people, including the tragic loss of over 100 Pakistani migrants in a shipwreck off Greece. Stricter border controls on land and air routes have pushed more individuals toward risky sea routes to Europe. The economic stress is not limited to the poor. Even wealthy and educated Pakistanis are leaving, exacerbating the brain drain issue. In 2022, over 750,000 people left Pakistan, triple the number from the previous year, including professionals such as doctors, engineers, IT experts, and accountants. While the lifting of COVID-19 travel restrictions played a part, the desire for better opportunities abroad among skilled individuals is a significant factor. An IMF deal would provide some relief from economic stress, but it would not eliminate the underlying structural factors that triggered Pakistan's crisis. These factors include heavy reliance on costly fuel imports and struggling textile exports, an inefficient agricultural sector grappling with water and energy shortages, and a corrupt political and economic elite unwilling to invest in public welfare. While an IMF deal could offer temporary respite and benefit the current government before elections, it would be a hollow victory. Without the necessary large-scale reforms that are politically risky, Pakistan would remain vulnerable to future economic crises.